On today's episode of the Cryptoverse, we'll do a recap of Anarchapulco Day 3. So this was on Saturday, the third day of Anarchapulco, and I didn't go to that many sessions in this day because I did a lot more networking, meeting and greeting and so on. Not intentionally, it was just that as you bump into people, you start conversations and then you end up missing sessions, but that's just as valuable as going to the actual sessions in my view. So one of the ones I did make sure I went to on this particular day was G. Edward Griffin's talk, and he entitled it This Thing Called Government. So G. Edward Griffin is the author of the famous book The Creature from Jekyll Island that documents the long history of monetary history in the United States that eventually led to the creation of the Federal Reserve and beyond. It's a very deep book. I can't imagine how much research he did when he was writing that book, but I've got the audio book and I've been through it at least once, maybe twice, and it's deep. It is real deep. Highly recommended reading. It's one of those things that helps you understand the problems with the existing system so that you can appreciate the power and the efficacy of cryptocurrency as a solution. Cryptocurrency is cool and all, but if you don't know what problem it solves, then it's not as profound as it actually is, right? So that was real cool. I've got a couple of notes actually from this talk. I don't generally make notes because I'm the type that just concentrates on what they're saying and then remembers it. But in this case, he had quite a few points to make. So he said things like, tyranny today is usually delivered by this mechanism called government. We can therefore assume that they are both the same thing. It's cause and effect. But then he goes on to say that it thunders when it rains, but does the thunder cause the rain? No. So it's like correlation, not causation thing. So he asked the question, do governments have to have this nature where wherever there is government, there ends up being tyranny? Is that a must? So he says governments always seem to end in tyranny, so we have to suppose so, right? In a democracy, are there any limits on the majority? Not usually, right? It's usually just majority rules, but then you get to the point, well, a lynch mob's okay, right? Because that's still majority rule, but it might be immoral. And then he says most Western countries are democracies, and the Constitution in the United States is different in the sense that it lists things that government specifically could not do, which is different to what they can do, right? So they couldn't do things like limit freedom of speech, they couldn't limit freedom of association, all that sort of stuff, right? Just general freedoms that are protected by the Constitution. So he said a republic, he was talking about a republic versus a democracy. A republic is a limited democracy that has, restrictions on the government, where the majority cannot authorize government representatives to do something that they themselves are not allowed to do. So if a citizen isn't allowed to steal, they cannot empower the government to steal. If the people themselves are not allowed to kill, then they cannot empower the government to kill on their behalf. That's a principle, right? So those, and then steal, taxation, those are the examples he gave. Democracy is a winner-take-all system which attracts the predator class, he said, which is kind of interesting because if that majority rule thing is true, it would attract people that wouldn't to have dominion over a lot of other people. He then gave a book recommendation called The Territorial Imperative, which I've never heard of, but he recommends that to understand how, people are territorial and they want to expand their territory, right? He then goes on to say, like, private companies that have these private cities, they may not still be the answer because they will exhibit the same tyranny as governments eventually. So they're a type of government, right? The fact that it's contractual means that they'll lean that way eventually, and it will attract the predator class. The only thing I disagree with there is that these private city contracts are voluntary, and they'll have termination clauses. They will end, naturally. You're not opting into them by default like you are with the government. And if the private city organization starts to go rogue, well, you just don't renew your membership, or you cancel it, or you just move out and leave your membership. You don't have to you'd have to wait till the end of your membership to move out, right? You would just say, screw it. I'll forfeit the other 6 months of my membership and I'm moving out, right? So if they did become tyrannical in a private city, people would move out, no one would renew their membership, and then they would go out of business. So that's what I think about that. So he said the US Constitution was a good beta test for a while there. But he says now we need to create a version 2 of the US Constitution that fixes the problems of the old one. He said the first one lasted for like 100 years, and then now we've experimented with it. We can see what problems there are with it, and if we made a new, tighter version, watertight version, maybe it would last, 200 or 500 years. And then eventually tyranny would return. It would fix the problems again. And then maybe the next one would last for 1,000 years, and on it would go. So he's saying here that in version 2 of the US Constitution, he would not have it where we form a government, right? Because no one wants to be governed. He would call it a protectorate. So the government's remit should not be to govern and control, it should be to protect, hence the term protectorate. So this is an entity that protects the people, does not govern them. So that would be the fundamental difference. Now, this new protectorate should run on these 8 principles, he says. The first one is that only individuals have rights, not the collective, right? So that's like a situation where you say, well, it's for the greater good that we have to arrest this person with no due process and drag them to Guantanamo Bay and torture them or whatever it happens to be. That's like violating the rights of the individual to benefit the collective. So in his new principle system, it would be only individuals have rights, not the collective, and the state must never be allowed to do something citizens are not allowed to do, like I mentioned just a second ago. Principle number 2 is the majority cannot deny the rights of the minority. Very interesting stuff. Number 3, social objectives are better achieved by voluntary means. There we go. So that would be things like private charities rather than government programs that tax people and then fund all manner of social programs, right? It says all social objectives, whatever the social objective may be, ending poverty or homelessness or whatever, are better achieved by voluntary means rather than government programs. Principle number 4, private property rights are as important an incentive, are important as an incentive to be productive. So property rights are the important incentive for the citizens to remain productive, because otherwise, if you violate personal property rights, the incentive to be productive is removed, and then there's no incentive to be productive anymore. Principle number 5 is freedom to accept or reject any currency based on my own assessment of its value. That's absolutely fascinating. So that would mean that would make everything a fiat currency. If people decree that has value, it has value, right? And you could use anything. That would completely open the doors to every type of digital value, cryptocurrency, digital asset, everything, right? Which would be cool. And then if it has value, the people says it has value, they can trade it for something else that has value because they said so, right? And then it's got nothing to do with government. That's finally the separation of government and money and state, as I sometimes term it. So principle number 6 is all citizens are equal under law. That's a little bit of a topic right now with regards to people in government don't seem to be held to the same standard, right? The rule of law doesn't seem to apply the same to government employees who are citizens versus private citizens. So that needs to be equality under the law is absolutely essential. Principle number 7 is leadership should be evaluated based on whether they lead and have people follow them voluntarily. So that's kind of interesting. And then number 8 is the state should protect, not provide. So that completely removes the welfare state because that's a provision, right? And it really shrinks the government's remit down to protection. So, I don't know, police force would be okay, I suppose. Maybe, I don't know if the fire service or the ambulance service would be in there. No. Maybe you'd have to privatize that. The provision of medical care, that's providing. So maybe that would be private as well. But protection, is pretty much it. That would be the only remit of the protectorate, not the government. So that was a really interesting talk. He got a massive standing ovation at the end of it. He was on in the morning, and then the other talks I went to were a debate with Cynthia McKenney and Adam Kokesh. Didn't end up being a debate, it was more like an interview. And that was interesting. Cynthia is really interesting. She actually came up to me afterwards because I was wearing like a really bright coloured t-shirt, and she complimented me on that, and sort of took note of my name and was going to look at my stuff. There was a talk, there was supposed to be a talk in the afternoon called The New Paradigm in Cryptocurrency, which didn't end up happening, which was one of the themes of the whole Anarchapulco event. There was loads of changes to the schedule, different orders, some speakers didn't speak at all, yada yada yada. Larkin Rose, I didn't really see his whole talk, but he did a talk called The Nature of the Beast. Oh, I did watch this guy's talk, Max Eigen. The Coming Smart Prism was his talk, and he was talking about, basically, yes, cryptocurrencies are great in all these new systems, but be aware that the people who are in control of the old system are still largely in control. So they can easily co-opt all these cryptocurrencies and use them to enslave us more than ever before. I did go up to the mic when he finished talking to ask a question, but I didn't get a chance to do it because there was people in front of me and we ran out of time. My question was going to be, though, I was going to say, Max, don't you think the fact that it's so easy to A, create a new cryptocurrency because it's all open source, and B, the fact that the minute we discover one of them has been co-opted, we can effortlessly and frictionlessly transfer our value to another currency that hasn't been co-opted, don't you think that very feature prevents the system from being co-opted as a whole? Because we can just flip around, right? Create a new currency, flip to this one, flip to that one, flip to that one. They would never be able to co-opt them fast enough, in my opinion. So unfortunately, wasn't able to ask that question. But I spent most of yesterday bumping into people who watch the show and having sort of longer conversations with them. So I only went to like maybe 2 or 3, 3 or 4, which I've just told you about there, talks on that day. Bottom line though, same sort of feedback really. The G. Edward Griffin talk was the only one I really felt I learned something from. It's theoretical, of course, and still didn't learn anything practical. I think that I can feel I can take the information and go and do something with it, right? I make a mild exception for G. Edward Griffin's because he actually laid out a problem, talked about the US Constitution, talked about how this idea that we can get rid of all government isn't a good idea because we need a protectorate, and then laid out the 8 principles upon which it should be based. So that was, I learned something in a theoretical sense there, but I'm not sure how to apply that practically. I guess you could follow these principles for yourself and your own business, if you wanted to. But there we go. That's all for today, guys. Thanks very much for joining me. If you like this episode, go ahead, hit that like button, and if you're new around here, get subscribed. If you would like access to my very best material, such as my structured online courses about cryptocurrency, head on over to my website, which is cryptoversity.com. There you can click on courses, take any one of the online courses that I've created for your educational delight. Alright guys, that is all for today. I'll be back with another video which will recap Cryptopulco, which was the 4th day in the sequence and was all about cryptocurrency. So until then guys, it's me, Chris Coney, saying bye for now.